Hello, everyone. My name is Johnny Singer, and today I will be talking about the impacts of bottom trawling on seafloor ecosystems and their biodiversity. So bottom trawling is a widespread fishing practice in which a large weighted net is lowered to the seafloor and then dragged across that surface in order to catch bottom-dwelling animals like crustaceans and different types of fish. It was first seen in records in around the 1300s, but it became really widespread in the late 1800s. And while it contributes to 20% of our global seafood, it's a controversial practice due to its destructive effects on our ocean ecosystems. So to give an idea of where bottom trawling occurs the most, we can look at these two graphs from a 2018 research article that basically scored different areas of water based on how much of them is trawled and how often. And we can see here at this graph in the upper right that Europe has the most prevalent bottom trawling. Here we can see some of the more specific areas and what proportion of them is trawled, as well as how frequently. So those with orange are going to be trawled once a year or multiple times a year, and those that are green are going to be untrawled. So we can also see here that most bottom trawling is done in shallower depths because generally these systems are easier to access. But we are seeing increasing amounts of trawling in deeper areas as we begin to deplete our shallower resources. And here at the top, we can see the Adriatic Sea, which I'm going to talk about more later, is this mostly shallow body of water that is really intensively trawled. So bottom trawling is so harmful because these nets are very non-selective. They just basically grab everything that's in their paths. And this is especially true with shrimp fishing because very fine mesh has to be used to catch those little shrimp. And so everything else that's the size of a shrimp or larger is also going to get caught in these nets. It's also the greatest cause of disturbance to our ocean floors because these weighted doors are going to go through and mix up the sediment and crush a lot of those organisms that are living in the sediment and on top of the sediment. And all these issues are really exacerbated by poor fishing management that doesn't properly implement regulations that are made to mitigate the harm caused by bottom trawling. And I'm going to be going more into depth about detriments to our seafloor communities, as well as particularly disruption of the sediments, as well as bycatch, and what are some solutions to this problem. So bottom trawling is very, very destructive to our seafloor communities. First off, it's just going to be really lowering the abundance of organisms in these systems, as well as decreasing biodiversity. And this is because those species that are more sensitive, as well as longer lived and slower growing, are going to be especially vulnerable because they're not able to replenish themselves quick enough to the rate in which they're being caught. And both of these things are going to decrease as well the productivity of these habitats. So looking specifically at our sedimentary habitats, a study done in 2014 sampled from both chronically trawled sediments and untrawled sediments in the Mediterranean Sea and found an up to 52% decrease in organic matter in the trawled areas, as well as a 50% reduction in biodiversity and 80% decrease in abundance of meiofauna. So meiofauna are basically these little teeny organisms that live actually in the space between individual grains of sediment. And they are very important for contributing to nutrient cycling, as well as providing a link between bacteria, which they feed on, and the larger animals that eat them, for example, sea cucumbers. And these graphs are from that 2014 study, and we can see this huge 80% decrease in abundance of meiofauna in these trawled areas of the same depth compared to untrawled areas. And we can also see a huge decrease in species diversity of meiofauna as well in the trawled areas. So sedimentary habitats make up the majority of our ocean floors. And when we're dragging these trawls through these sediments, it's going to be mixing them into the water. A 2016 study in Iberia, which is in Southwest Europe, found that there was a six-fold increase of sediments in waters after bottom trawling occurred. And this is going to have a variety of impacts. First off, it's going to erode that seafloor. since you're mixing all these sediments, the finer ones are going to get suspended in the water column, and this is going to leave behind larger, coarser sediment. And this can completely change the composition of this habitat because different animals are able to live in coarser or finer sediments. A study that was looking at the Bay of Biscay in France saw that from 1967 to 2014, there was a 30% decrease in mud content, and mud is our finer sediments. Also, when you're having all these sediments in the water, you're going to decrease the ability for light to penetrate and reach our different photosynthesizers, like our algae and our plants. Also, it's going to be moving these nutrients that have been settled in these sediments and reintroducing them into the water column. And this influx of nutrients is going to lead to eutrophication, where we have these algae blooms. And then when they decompose, they deplete the water of oxygen. And this is going to lead to massive die-off of marine animals. And this isn't just a temporary issue. It can have long-term impacts as well on nutrient levels in the water. And this is because as a 2020 study saw, trawling is going to actually disrupt structures in that sedimentary floor that decreases its ability to denitrify the water. So above here, we can see how the sediment is supposed to look like in untrawled areas. And we can see a lot of texture. We can see these burrows that create microhabitats as well as increase the overall surface area of the floor. And this is going to host all those microbes that facilitate that denitrification process. However, here, after bottom trawling, we can see the sediment becomes very homogeneous and very flat. And this decreases its ability to efficiently remove nitrogen from the water. And so these researchers found that there was up to 50% net decrease in denitrification in areas that were trawled. And so this has huge implications for our globe's marine nitrogen cycle, because we're going to have these imbalances in nutrients, and we're going to see more and more of those eutrophication events and dead zones and massive animal die-off. In talking about our seafloor communities, while they're not as widespread as our sedimentary areas, hard bottom communities such as coral reefs are especially sensitive to trawling. Up to 90% of coral will die after being disturbed by trawls, and these are often very ancient and old systems. And these corals are foundations for extremely diverse and productive communities that rely on them to survive. Now, bycatch is basically just any non-target species that is caught through fishing. And bottom trawling has really high rates of bycatch. They contribute to around half of our globe's bycatch. And most of these animals that are caught are just disposed of back into the ocean, and many of them are already dead or injured and going to die. And when we talk about bycatch, we usually focus on our longer-lived, slower-growing species again, because these are the ones that aren't able to replenish themselves quick enough to keep up with the rate in which they're being killed. And these are our sea turtles, our sharks, seabirds, our mammals like seals and dolphins. And this is going to lower the diversity of our ecosystems. So looking at one species in particular, our loggerhead sea turtles, they are found commonly near the bottom of the seafloor in the Adriatic Sea, that intensively trawled area I mentioned before. And in these areas, bycatch is the main reason for them being threatened and for their decline. It's estimated that over 100,000 of them are caught each year, and of these, 10 to 50% of them die. So what can be done? Overall, decreasing our consumption of seafood is going to decrease demand. Also, modifying our nets and creating these innovations to increase net selectivity will decrease our rates of bycatch. Also, compiling research and gaining knowledge on our animals' migration patterns, life history will allow us to know what times of year and what areas they're most sensitive to best avoid disturbing them during those times, as well as stronger regulations that can better implement all these mitigation strategies. So one of these net modifications are called turtle excluder devices, and they've already been implemented in certain areas. Basically, it includes having this metal gate towards the back of the net, which smaller target species are able to just pass through, but big animals like sea turtles are able to push past and exit through this top exit hole. So this effectively decreases turtle bycatch. And like I mentioned before, research is really important to making these informed conservation decisions. The ocean is generally a very unexplored area. And so the more our technologies improve, we're able to gain more knowledge about different animals' migration patterns, life histories, so we can create better mitigation strategies for decreasing their bycatch, as well as understanding where these vulnerable habits are and avoiding these areas like coral reefs and areas that are already contaminated with excess nitrogen, for example, from agricultural runoff. And that is all for my presentation. Thank you all so much for listening.